Sylvia. It's good to
And
finally. How are you? How are you?
good to see you.
Good to see you as well. And I'm so glad that we are finally doing this podcast. And I do believe that your experiences as an operator, as a board member, as a CEO at the White House nonprofit and technology companies would be really beneficial to our listeners as they would learn how to create your own opportunities in varied sectors and most importantly really understand the why behind their career trajectories. So really excited to have you.
Thank you, Shira. I'm really looking forward to this as well.
Absolutely. So let's dive right in. Sylvia, we've read and heard a lot about your spectacular career, but would love to hear from you about your journey in your own words.
Well, thanks. I typically do get introduced like, CEO, White House commissioner, author, tech exec, board director for a Fortune 100 company. But, I actually, another way to introduce myself is, all my grandparents were from Mexico. My family struggled with finances. We had to go live with other family members. I grew up part of my time on a dirt road. Um, and there was a very bad health, trauma to our family that changed lots of things. And so, I think sometimes when people look at children, they don't always see their potential. And I think one of the things that I know is children have amazing potential. And I was really fortunate. My mom was born in Mexico. My dad was born in El Paso, the US. And she had that, immigrant drive. And I think a lot of that was instilled in me as well. Um, I was able to get into programs like this early childhood program called Head Start. I developed a love of reading and, it was a small town and I literally read every children's book. And also I joined the Girl Scouts, and the Girl Scouts were pivotal because they really taught me about creating opportunity and never walking away from a sale until you've heard no 3 times. And that is so important. That really taught me not only about how to create those opportunities so your dreams come true, but also how do you find common ground? How do you get around a no? And, as a trailblazer in technology, there weren't a lot of women like me. So having that ability that I started practicing from the age of 7 of like, how do you create opportunity? And when somebody tells you no, how do you turn that into a yes? Or how do you find common ground? Those were absolutely pivotal. So because one of the things in Girl Scouts, I earned my science badge, and one of the activities was creating a rocket. I built an Estes rocket. Wow. And I failed a lot of times. It took me until my 6th time till I finally got that rocket up in the beautiful blue New Mexico sky. But Shreya, that was really important because I learned that, failure is part of learning. And in Girl Scouts, failure is FAIL, first attempt in learning. So wow. I didn't turn it into, I don't know how to do this. It's like, I haven't learned how yet. And so when the rocket went up, I felt like I could do this. And I realized that people in science, in space science, they really knew science and math. So I super applied myself in math. I always asked for extra homework. And even when the teacher didn't give me extra homework, I did extra things. And so I got so good at math, I was able to become a rocket scientist at the NASA's Jet Propulsion Labs. And that was literally my first job out of college, where I became an industrial engineer, systems engineer. But coincidentally to that, I had applied to graduate school at Stanford in engineering because that had been a childhood dream. And, a lot of times, our family and our obligations to our family, really take precedent in my life and a lot of your listeners' life as well. And when I was a kid, when I was in 11th grade, I had saved a lot of money because I wanted to go away to college. But my grandmother died and no one had money to bury her. And if you've seen the movie Coco, which is about Mexico and Mexicans and how they feel about the afterlife, you cannot let your relative go in a pauper's grave.
Absolutely.
And I was the only one that had money. I had been saving money for this dream. And I remember my father and I went to the bank, and the bank manager sat down with me and said, if you take out the CD money, you lose all the interest. And I was like, yeah, I know. And I gave the money to my family. So it was a dream deferred about going to graduate school at a place like Stanford. That was still a dream, but I had to defer it. So once I graduated undergrad and I got this great job at NASA at JPL, I applied to Stanford. And honestly, I should have applied to more places, but I only applied to one place and I got in. But
That's pretty solid.
I know, but I tell people, hey, you got to hedge your bets, but I did get in, and I ended up being one of the first Hispanics, male or female, to have ever gotten a graduate engineering degree from Stanford, and so I was kind of really one of. I had a great experience at NASA, but I really wanted to follow up. And after working on 2 missions, which was Voyager 2 and the Solar Probe, which has been renamed to the Parker Solar Probe, and that's circling the sun right now.
Yeah.
I went to Stanford, and that's kind of when technology was just booming. And all my friends.
Which year?
It was 83, and all my friends were getting jobs left and right.
Yeah.
Intel, LSI Logic, etc. And I couldn't get a job. I submitted resumes for over 100 jobs. I didn't get anything. And I finally got a job as a facilities engineer in San Jose. Now, there isn't anything wrong with being a facilities engineer, but I had been a rocket scientist. I'd gone to Stanford. I thought I would have a different entree. But nonetheless, I realized when you're a trailblazer, not everyone, when they look at, they looked at me, they didn't see Silicon Valley engineer.
Right.
But I didn't let that stop me. I was persistent and I was resilient, and I got my foot in the door. And when I was there, I raised my hand for everything. And finally, my boss gave me a job in the manufacturing process. And I was able to do it the way the standard process was. But I also went and I bought sandwiches for the crew, and I asked them what they would do differently. And they had some good ideas. And so I put an innovative plan in place, and I submitted both. And the big boss in manufacturing came over and he's like, well, yeah, we always do it that way. And he looks at this and he goes, we've never tried it that way. And we did. And production went way up. Why that was so important, and why, no matter if, sometimes you don't get the break you think, sometimes you do have to make your own luck. IBM then decided to build a massive manufacturing plant, 765,000 square feet. And that manufacturing boss remembered, he said, I want the engineer who increased production to do the manufacturing lab. And at that moment, when we were able to do some pretty innovative things, and that's what he wanted it to be a showcase, which meant the bigwigs from IBM, all the top brass, they came down to see it.
Wow. And
I realized they're coming to see something I did. So I went to talk to my boss and I said, how do I get to be one of them? And, he said, he laughed. And he had one of those really loud laughs, like, and I said, but remember, I just took that as my first no. And I said, imagine if it were possible, what would you do? What could you do? And he started to rattle off things like, you have to carry a bag. I started writing things down. I said, what's carry a bag? Remember, I'm an engineer. Yeah. And what he meant is you have to do sales, right? And he kind of rolled his eyes like, really? And he said, product marketing, corporate marketing, international. You also have to be able to run a P&L. I didn't know what run a P&L meant either. And I just wrote it down. I didn't ask. But you know what he gave me? He gave me a checklist. He gave me a checklist of what I should do. And, sales was top of that list. And so it took me a long time, a better part of a year. IBM was looking for engineers in sales and marketing in Silicon Valley. And again, they looked at me, had a great track record, right? But they didn't quite see it, but I didn't give up. And I finally got into the famous IBM Sales and Marketing School. And I was able to do that and do really well. And a friend of mine working for IBM got a job at this hot company called Apple Computer.
Right.
And he brought me along. And so I did product channel marketing. And from there, I saw the international was growing, and I saw that there was an opportunity in Latin America. And I thought, I can speak Spanish. This is a no-brainer. Again, no, they wanted somebody with already that had demonstrated international experience.
Right.
And it took me 6 months. But what I did was I relied on my superpower. And all of your listeners have a superpower. They've got a hunger to be better, and they've got a hunger to live their life potential, and they've got something that really differentiates them. And at that time, obviously, having been a rocket scientist, my data analytics skills were pretty sharp. And so I did an analysis that showed that the Pacific region could grow by well over $100 million if they focused on U.S. multinationals that already had signed agreements in the U.S.
Right.
And this is the days before Salesforce and stuff, CRM and all that. And so I put together a presentation with little clip art flags and stuff. And I thought, so who cares? Well, clearly the gatekeepers didn't care.
Right.
But I thought the person who's in charge of sales cared. And then that was, I tracked down that person, and I waited in his office, in his building. And because I was in the same company, I could wander into the building. And I saw him and I said, John, I can show you how you can increase sales by $100 million next year with signed corporate contracts. And he looked at me like, who are you? And I showed him my badge. And then he said 5 minutes in the team room, showed him the presentation, and it was printed. And he goes, wow, this is a good idea. I've never thought of it. And he went to take it, and I put my hand on it. And he said, can I have it? I said, yeah, it comes with me though. And that's how I finally broke into international. So then I did international, was doing well. I got recruited to a networking company. We had some really great success there. And then I got recruited to Autodesk, and we really had breakout success. There, I got recruited to Dell. But one thing I was noticing is I was getting to the director level, but I wasn't able to break through to the next level. Yeah. And again, I joined Dell at an amazing time. But I'll be honest with you, I was like wondering, I'm doing phenomenal, and I'm not breaking through. And it really came home to me one day when I went to my performance evaluation, and my team had done an amazing thing. We had not only been part of the great enterprise server marketing effort, because that was our responsibility, and we grew the business. The whole company grew the business by $1 billion one year. That was phenomenal. But we had targeted a subsegment of the power user that had been overlooked. Now everyone knows about it, but back then, not so much.
Yeah.
And we did a specific online effort, and major accounts didn't want it because they didn't want sales to go to online. They want to stay within the major account channel. And then the consumer didn't want it because they didn't want to scare people away with the high server prices.
Yeah.
So they let us 1 week and try, and we had to interrupt the sales. But, the first, I was, since I was the manager, I got in there and took the first call, and I interrupted a sale, and I said, you need to call this number to complete the sale. And I said, you realize, I think it was like $35,000 worth of servers.
Wow.
And he's like, I know what I want. And the reason I was ordering online is I don't want to talk to anyone. He was definitely, and that happened all weekend. And so by the end of the week, it was fine. Well, the thing was that year, it turned out to be the highest gross margin contributing product segment was that power user. Yet not nearly as large in terms of obviously enterprise, but in terms of the profit per product, it was the highest.
Right.
I tell you all that because I had when I was going into my performance review, I'm sitting there thinking, wow, I'm going to bust out. Right. And my boss has got a lot of people, and he said, Sylvia, great, here's your raise, here's your bonus. And I'm like, stock? How about stock options? And he's like, well, so then I just went through everything I just told you. And he goes, gosh, I wish you had told me and reminded me of all that. He said, I could have gotten you, I think, another 1,000 shares. And he just sort of said it flippantly. Well, Shreya, those 1,000 shares split 6 times. So it was $1 million difference. Right. And so at that point, I thought, I got to do something different,
Yeah.
And so luckily I went to go talk to the chief of staff of the CFO, a really brilliant guy, right. Tom Meredith. And as chief of staff, I asked her, I took her to lunch, and I said, what's going on? What am I doing wrong? Right? What's not working? And she said, well, Sylvia, you're saying you're beating your number, you're making your numbers, your team's executing. She said, that's sort of your job. And Dell's growing so fast, if it's growing so fast, it's splitting 6 times. Everyone's making their numbers, right? Everyone's beating their numbers. But she said, you need to show your value add and how it aligns with the company strategy. And she said, the fact that your team highlighted and focused and introduced, that market segment, which was actually the highest gross percentage contributing margin of any product line. She said that is high value add, and it aligns with the company's strategy, which is to scale profitably.
Right.
So that sounds simple, but as soon as I began talking like that about my value add and how it aligned with the company's strategy, everything changed. And one of
Change in
the
narrative, is that what you're saying? It was literally a change in the narrative.
it was a change in the narrative and owning it, right? Owning that I was at my team were adding value,
Right.
but making it so specific.
Right.
It wasn't just that we were exceeding our numbers. It's like, great, stand in line. Everyone is
Yeah.
exceeding their numbers.
Sure.
But your team identified something that was highly valuable and an addition, and it fit with a company strategy. And I got good at that. And so much so there were a couple of engineers that left Dell and teamed up with another engineer, and they brought me in, and we started a software company. And we were able to get not only a term sheet, but we got acquired in very early stage days. Nothing like that values today, but back then it gave me some more options. And then, then an important pivot was I listened to a demographer and realized there was a lot of opportunity in education and scaling. How do you scale educational solutions? And I thought, I'm not an educator. I'm not good at the one-on-one or one-on-few, but I do know how to scale.
Right.
And so I created grassroots mobilization campaigns that were highly effective and went to very big cities, including Los Angeles. And that got President Obama's attention, and that I got invited to be a White House commissioner. And then I focused on, how can you just focus on one thing, not many things, because the federal government's huge. And I focused on dual language. At the time, they could not use federal funds for dual language, but yet there were all these kids in early childhood that were coming into those programs speaking another language, but they only had English only curriculum. And research showed the fastest way to learn English is to bridge off the native language.
Right.
And I had to get a coalition of departments that supported it. So Health and Human Services supported it because they said, yes, if we can get kids to learn English quicker, they'll have better health outcomes. And then, surprisingly, an uncommon ally was the Department of Defense. They supported it because they said, we need folks to learn English and to speak it fluently, but in addition to that, we need native speakers of other languages. And so they became a supporter. So I have a book, a middle school memoir, Path to the Stars, and there's a picture of me and President Obama. And that picture, he had called me in. You could tell it's later in his tenure because his hair is gray. And he said, thank you. Thanks for leading change in federal policy. So I always feel kind of good about that. But then I had been on the national board of the Girl Scouts of the USA, had been pivotal in changing my life. And so the previous CEO had left. They asked me to step in. I had run, obviously, businesses. And so I was really excited about that opportunity. I said at that time, I had moved to Santa Barbara from Austin. I said, headquarters is in New York. I said, I'm only going to do it for a short term. Yeah. 4 years later, I finally stepped down. But my focus was, I saw girls all over. They had a mobile device in their hand and to communicate mostly with friends. But how to get them to be not just users of technology, but the creators and the inventors and the designers. And so that became a big focus. And we created 146 new badges, and 126 of them were in STEM: robotics, cybersecurity, automotive, coding, design analytics, thinking like a programmer. Really cool stuff. And I think for me, the fact that we redesigned the curriculums to be relevant to girls, we got huge uptick. And my last year, which was 2019, my full year, 2019, over 1 million STEM badges were earned. Wow. And in cybersecurity, 180,000. And it wasn't just, it wasn't just in one city, it was across America. It was in rural communities, it was in urban communities, it was suburban communities. So the fact that we've made these really relevant. And, I had been with the Girl Scouts for like 12 years, 8 years on the board, 4 years as CEO. And so it was time to let other leadership take over. And, when I stepped down, I got a call to be on the Qualcomm board of directors, and then later on the Credo. And so now you find me on 2 corporate boards, publicly traded, and then 2 early stage boards as well.
It's it's such an inspiring career journey, and specifically so because I've had a diverse career myself, and of course, like
Mhm.
I'm literally 8 years into my career, but it's really inspiring to see that someone else has also had that kind of career, because at least in India, when I tell my parents that, hey, I started banking and then I moved to nonprofit. And so my parents are always confused. Hey, what are you trying to do? What are the kind of skills that you're trying to build? But I think, at least in India, there's always a singular focus. And however, I also feel that there is so much opportunity that lies in all these diverse experiences. However, you can still focus while you have these diverse experiences. And that's exactly what you suggested as well, right? You focused when you were, doing all this. So, how do you really practice focus in your career, in your life? And how do you make sure that you are consistently doing that?
Well, something that I also learned around the way in terms of focus is I tell people don't major in the minors,
Mm,
right?
right.
Don't major in the minors. What is going to really bring a business the most impact, or whatever work you're doing, the most impact? When you've got a job, yes, there are things that you have to do, but you've got to prioritize them too.
Right.
What is the most strategic? What will bring the most value to the organization? And so I tell people, really don't major in the minors, major in the majors, the key things. And so really practice getting communicating your value add and what your team has done. And so in terms of focus, I think you need to follow the through line of what really excites you, or what is your superpower. So for a lot of my career, it was my data analytics, whether it was in rocket science, whether it was innovating on a manufacturing floor, whether it was even in sales, having that kind of mindset of, how do you create an advantage? And to a certain degree, that took me not only in education, but to a certain extent also in Girl Scouts. But the other thing is, if you have dreams of breaking into the C-suite, you realize that you have to work on your communication skills as well. And so the focus comes from, what is it you want to do? What will make you develop and live a life of your potential? And so then it doesn't become kind of a hard thing to do. It actually becomes something you want to do, because it's on the path of you getting to your goal. And when you're doing something and it doesn't excite you, you don't see how it's relevant to your path or to your dream, it's really hard to stay focused, because you're like, yeah,
Absolutely. I agree.
right.
Yeah.
So there's a through line of your interests and also your superpower. And your superpower varies. Doesn't have to be in math. Maybe it's your superpower in how you connect the dots.
Mm.
Maybe it's your superpower of, how you recognize people's value add and can make them amazing contributors, because that's something you're really good at. You're great at team building. Whatever your listeners value add or superpower, it's
Right.
important to pay attention to that.
Yeah.
uh, so that, kind of look at that through line and just look at what really interests you, what gets you excited. I still to this day like to do data analytics. I don't do it nearly at the level of rocket science,
Yeah.
but it's still something that I know I really enjoy.
Right.
um,
But would love to sort of dive deeper into your board memberships, right? And just because many of our listeners are young women who are trying to understand how to be on the board of a company, or what does it even mean to be, a board member, right? Is that something that's actually right for them? So you mentioned that you are on the board of Qualcomm, Credo, and a couple of early stage startups. And you, of course, once you were out of the Girl Scouts of the USA, you got a call from Qualcomm. But why and, how did you actually decide that this was the right time for you to become a board member?
so when you think about what board members do, they're responsible for the strategy, governance, very
Right.
important, risk,
Yeah.
and managing one employee, and that's a CEO.
Right.
The other part is they are not operators.
Hmm.
And so that's important, because sometimes I feel like, especially for a large public company, they have experts. in all of the different fields. And so your job as a board member is to provide that bigger picture view, and especially in that industry or area of expertise that you're going to provide additional wisdom or thought or connections to. So I think you have to be, willing to realize, okay, I'm not an operator, okay, in this role, right? We only have this, our job is, strategy, risk, governance, and, working with the CEO and managing the CEO. So that is really key. So I think a lot of people, it's when they tell me they want to be on a board and then they hand me a CV and the CV looks like I want a job. That's not it. So one of the first things you're going to have to do is redo your CV in terms of how it highlights those skill sets. How does it highlight your knowledge of strategy and your ability to, really think about that? And what experience do you have in governance? If you are a CPA, there's always a need for CPAs in
Right.
companies, right, for the audit committee, et cetera.
Yeah.
So it's important that you create that CV that looks like that. And then most executive firms work with board bios. So kind of create kind of a one-page narrative of what you have done and how it fits into making a contribution at a board level. Again,
Right.
it's just a one-page narrative, and that is really important. Not all executive firms use them, but most of them do. And realize it's not, you don't always work with that quote unquote, headhunter. Most of the big firms have a special board practice. So if that's something you want to do, find out who are the people in that board practice, and get to know them or find out who they are. So that's an important
And these are
aspect of it as
internal
well.
people on the payroll of the company, or they are
No, they're with the recruit firms.
okay.
So like Heidrick and Struggles has a regular corporate practice, but they also have a specific CEO and board
Oh, wow.
practice. Yeah, so you want to find out, Russell Reynolds, same thing, Spencer Stewart, all of the big ones, that they have a specific, practice focusing on boards. So you want to find them. Now, some of the smaller companies may not be working with those big firms, and so maybe an executive recruiter that works with those firms will be able to help get into that opportunity. Now, but the other thing is you have to have demonstrated the strategy, and I think one of the reasons I got called was when I was the CEO, I got some pretty high profile opportunities. I spoke at Salesforce's Dreamforce, right?
Right.
I got Girl Scouts to be the charity of choice. The year before us was Bono and Red, and the next year was Girl Scouts. We were like, I would have everyone repeat after me: Dreamforce in 2017 is going to go green. Dreamforce in 2017 is going to go green. And guess what? In 2017, Dreamforce went green with the Girl Scouts. So, but that got me on a big stage. And, instead of talking about you need to help girls, what I did instead is I turned around of how Girl Scouts was developing a digitally trained workforce for the future to help their communities and their companies be competitive at a global level. And I highlighted some of the STEM badges that we were working on: cybersecurity, robotics, automotive. And that kind of blew them away because they saw that we had a strategy, we were executing on it, it was filling an important workforce need for technology. So that showed a big, in a really big picture on a really big stage, that I understood strategy. And actually, I got an early stage company. That's where they got me, because they saw that. And then the Qualcomm opportunity also came from that time. So there are times that you need to be able to demonstrate that or have examples of that as well.
Right. And how did you think, or how did you really, for you personally in this, or I would say at this point in time in your career, why did you think that this was the right time to become a board member? Why not, a CEO of some other company, some other technology company?
Yeah, I did think about that.
Right.
I did. But I realized there were a couple of things that I want to do still. I want to write a book.
Right.
I want to really have kind of more of a portfolio career, kind of get back into technology. And, one of the things I want to do is to make sure, as the semiconductor industry and technology industry is expanding all over the world, I want to make sure that women have the skills and the understanding of how to get to the top levels, kind of like I did. So I'm very interested in like working with the Global Semiconductor Alliance to help them to get the workforce that they need to be able to drive the industry to entirely new levels. So,
Right.
with those things, I thought, okay. And, a CEO job, I really enjoyed my time. But the way I did it, I made sure, I was traveling a lot and meeting people in the field, et cetera. So I was on the road 200 days a year. So
Right.
that's a lot of traveling as well. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. I enjoyed the experience dramatically.
Absolutely. Now, you are on the boards of 4 companies. How does one really decide the right mix of board memberships? And why not 3? Why not 5 or 6?
Well, so if you're on publicly traded boards, there's BlackRock, State Street. There's firms that say, "Hey, you can't be on very many public boards."
Right.
And in fact, if you're a chair of an audit committee or one of the key committees or board chair, they really don't like you being on more than 2 boards. They call that overboarding. And especially in a time of change, there's a lot of geopolitical change, which you're starting to see more and more large investment houses look at how many boards, the board tenure, and how many boards the different board members have been serving on. So if you're on a publicly traded board, 3 is probably good and will not raise any eyebrows. But beyond that, I think you're going to start hearing from large investors. Um, the the workload and responsibility on a early stage is very different than on a public board,
Right.
but there's still a lot of vetting that gets done to make sure that there, there's no conflict of interest in any of that work. So the work you're doing on a public board or a private board is not conflicting with the public board. And also realize they do take time. And if you have a situation, you're going to have to spend the time doing that.
Hmm.
So Credo, before it went public, I very much wanted to be on a board. I wanted to have that experience, that learning opportunity. So I got on Credo before it was public. The market was booming. All of a sudden, in December, the market just started to recede. And the banker was saying, I don't think you guys should go public. But we actually needed them to go public to raise the money to get to the next level. And we were having sales, but we wanted kind of that step function boost that going public would bring us. Um, and so it's December here in the US. That's the holiday season. I'll tell you, from Christmas to New Year's, and most of our board members happened to be in Asia at the time. So, I'm up at very early in the morning
Right.
doing board calls, all that week. It wasn't just like, taking it easy, taking a call. No. And we actually redid our strategy of how we were going to go out, how much money we were going to raise on that round. So we put together an entirely new strategy. And I'll tell you, we went public. And we were one of the few technology companies that Goldman took public that year. So it worked out, but it's just an example that sometimes, it isn't just your quarterly board meetings. It could take a lot more time and a lot more effort. And you are the one responsible. It's not like you could say, can't do it this time. I mean, you
Yeah.
have significant responsibility to the organization, to the shareholders, to the community. So you take it seriously.
Right. And then since you mentioned that it's very different to be on the board of a public company versus a private company, so what are the typical differences that you've seen, based on your experiences thus far?
Yeah, one of the things in a private company, especially a technology private company, a lot of it is in the early stages just around the technology. And as they're starting to sell or trying to grow, they may or may not know how to grow or sell and position their products for an enterprise market. And so in those companies, I'm finding that I have a lot of expertise to lend because it's mostly a much smaller company around the technology and they're just building out their sales and marketing. And so helping them with introductions, helping them think about how their product could be a significant value add in this particular part of a market or a company is important. It's funny, but when I talk to a lot of early stage companies and they just want to break into a company, and they have a contact, I'll say, are they in the revenue? Are they in op? operational expenses, and or are they in R&D? And they're like, I don't know, this is what they do. And I said, well, your value add proposition will really be different depending on what you're doing. And so I find that, that's not quite being an operator, but using your expertise in a way that can be really helpful. And I tend to enjoy that.
Right. And have you seen any difference in terms of how the executives or the founders of these companies approach board members because of their stage in the in the company history or stuff like that?
What's a little bit different is that in the early stage days, most of the board members are investors.
Right.
And so, they're the people that put money in. I'm sort of unusual because I've been what they call an independent board member at an early stage, and that's unusual. But that's because I've shown value add of how I can help them get clients, how I can help them kind of think about their strategy in a way they haven't before. And so that's very valuable. And so they want me on as a board member. So I think at that early stage, you realize it's unusually to have an independent. It's mostly all investors. As a company gets bigger, they start looking for independents to provide additional expertise. And then right when they're going public, it's usually when the investors step off, and then they'll add additional independence. So for your audience, that's also a really good time if you know someone that's about to go public, a lot of their investors tend to be rolling off. And so it's a great way to position yourself as an advisor, because then you've got a great opportunity to step in as a board member.
Absolutely. And in terms of like, you also mentioned the last time we chatted that if you're an auditor, if you are a CFO or an investor relations person, then you have a higher chance to get on the board. So is that primarily because of the macro conditions that prevail at the time, or is it something else? It's because of the
No, there's some very strict guidelines to run an audit committee, that you have to have experience, understanding writing financial statements, and understanding and running, that type of responsibility. You're an accredited financial executive. That's, you can't kind of wave that away. You have to have somebody who can do that. In the other board committees, things like governance, if you show that you've been part of governance in another company, putting in the strategy, managing risk, and also compensation is another area that sometimes they want people with that type of experience. And then sometimes they really do want people with industry experience of, you've got a great product and you're trying to break into automotive, for example, or you're trying to break into the oil and gas industry. Bringing in somebody on the board who has significant insight into that industry, they understand the cycle, they understand the buying process, they understand who the key partners are. That provides a lot of credibility and just a wealth of experience, and is very, very helpful. Also international, folks that have, significant experience in India or China, etc., is also very, very important. So there's different ways that you can provide value. And for me, coming from technology, I like to always stay up on technology. And having been somebody who literally worked my way up from being an engineer, I kind of have that mindset that I can bring value to an organization.
Right. And it's very interesting because, I was just reading up, I really respect, since I'm in the venture capital space in India, I really respect Bill Gurley and Vinod Khosla. And they talk about, since they have been on boards of multiple companies, they talk about how, the best board members are the ones that the founders always seek. Right. But there are obviously, like, as you also suggested, that, there are a few headhunters. There are a few people who actually reach out to investors of the companies that might be potentially going public and stuff like that. And I'm sure that you have multiple people around you who are board members themselves. What are the most effective ways you found to be on the board, to get because it just seems like a very competitive role to get. So what do you think has been the most effective for people around you, and of course, like yourself?
Networking people who know what you do, your expertise is very important.
Right.
So that is very key.
Hmm.
And then when you're in a boardroom, typically most people in that room also are on other boards. So how you perform. And a really important part of being a board member, again, you're not an operator, is how you ask questions.
Right.
So are your questions strategic? Are they leading to a point? How do you ask it in a way that it doesn't, it's not asking people like, how do you do your job? But really, how do you add strategic value in the way you're asking questions? Are you illuminating an additional point that perhaps had been overlooked? That is super key. Um, so when people see that, they're like, okay, they're great at, they're illuminating something that had been kind of overlooked.
Yeah.
Um, so I think even when you're on a board and you have that ability, how you ask questions and get to that strategic issue, whether it's risk related or strategy or in whatever area it is really key. So letting people know what your goals are, and putting yourself in target rich environments is really good and really key. It turned out that I wanted to really much be on a early stage, a company that was about to go public, and I was having a hard time breaking in. And one of the key gatekeepers was in New York, and I'm living in Santa Barbara, and I literally just flew to New York
Yeah.
whenever she was available
Yeah.
and met with her. That opened the door to the person on the West Coast that was the right person. She and I met, that was good. And then that opened up that door. So, you know, yes, we can do a ton on Zoom. Yes, we can meet people, virtually all over the world, which is fantastic. But sometimes getting yourself in front of somebody so that they really get the gist of who you are is important. And I know for myself, because I'm literally one of the few like myself, right? That you sort of get overlooked because you're not what the majority of that industry looks like. And so being able to get on that plane, go to New York, and communicate how my skills were exactly relevant and
Hmm.
things that they hadn't put together, they're like, oh wow, you're exactly what we've been looking for. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I know. So realize you have to be able to promote yourself and sell yourself strategically as well.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's always out of mind, out of sight. Yeah, I agree. Now, sometime for our rapid fire questions. Uh,
Okay.
the first one being, who's your favorite board member and why?
You know what? I've got a lot of favorites for very different reasons, but some of them are board members that think in three dimensions. Like I feel like sometimes we're playing tic tac toe and they're like chess, like but three-dimensional chess. They're like, wow, they put the dots together, but in so many different ways. So I think that's a skill. There's a board member. I tell her she asks like the perfect question, but like a surgeon that there is no blood.
Wow.
She can get to this point and you're like, how does she do it? And do it in a way that no one is offended. There's
Right.
no blowback,
Yeah.
but she got to the issue right then.
Right.
And then there's others who I feel like they're able to kind of frame the situation in a different way that I think also makes it easier for management to answer. Like one board member, he said, I see the situation. Um, Imagine this is a diving competition. It helped me understand, is it the dive that's a 10 in difficulty and it was a 5 in execution, or is it just a 5 in difficulty and you need an 8 in
Wow.
execution? So I thought, wow, that's a great way to ask that
Yeah.
question, right?
So that you get
So
answers, right?
right,
Right.
right.
Yeah.
And so I'm fortunate to be surrounded by some just amazing board
Yeah.
members, and there's so much I learned from them.
Yeah. Now, your time while at the Girl Scouts of the USA versus the White House versus technology companies like Apple and Dell.
Mm. What was my favorite? You know, it depends how you want to measure it. You know, like when you think about, um, if you gotten just recently, I was speaking to an educator in California, and she was telling me, "Oh, Sylvia, you know, gosh, dual language gets funded now, just not in pre-K, but all the way to, you know, high school. There's dual
Yeah.
language." And I was thinking, yeah, now, but you realize that impacted millions, right? Um, but so that makes you feel good. You know, Girl Scouts, we really impacted millions of girls as well. You know, and in technology, there were just, for me, that was a lot of learning and performing and getting teams to work together, you know, whether it's internationally or not, that makes you feel, you know, really great. And so I think what you feel most successful was like, is it a way that you really lived your best potential?
Mm,
And did you make a positive difference? And I feel like in all those different industries, I did that, maybe in different ways, but I did that.
yeah. And living in New York versus Santa Barbara.
You know what? There is nothing like the Big Apple, but you know, it was amazing. And sometimes I think I lived in probably in the most recent best times, you know, right before COVID. Come on, it was magical. I really just loved it. There really is nothing like New York. I remember I was at the Whole Foods in Columbus Circle,
Right.
which is near the theater district,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden there was a Cher song that was playing, and all these people who were actors and singers just started, you know, singing and dancing
Oh,
to it, and
wow.
I didn't even think about like recording it. It was just like, oh my God, this is like an only a New York moment.
Right.
But now I live in Santa Barbara. You know, we're right by the ocean, right by the mountains, wine country, organic food. It's, you know, it's not a bad place to be either.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. What book are you reading right now?
You know, I'm reading, you know, a couple of books. I'm reading a book about, uh, well, a Friedman book, and also a book about the different ge- you know, geopolitical issues. I'm
Right.
doing a lot of research and thinking about that, because, you know, how is that going to turn out? So, you know, and what are the different scenarios that might be playing out as well?
Right.
So I'm reading a lot about that right now.
Very interesting. And what are your thoughts, since you are on the board of an AI company, what are your thoughts on AI? Just a very broad question, I know, but what's happening in AI?
So, you know, we are creating it, and I think about the Chinese symbol. You know, it's symbol. I think it's Tao. It's white and black, and it's a
Yeah.
mix. And
Right.
I think sometimes we just think about the utopian aspects of stuff, and we have to be prepared for the dystopian aspects of stuff
Mhm.
too. Now, it's also important not to lose sight that there is dystopian, and I think we need to really work to prevent the bad dystopian, but to really enjoy the positive parts. And I think I'm hopeful that we do that with AI, which we probably didn't do with social media. And so social media has had some really harmful impacts. You know, the teenage suicide rate has gone way up. You know, a lot of negative things. And so those are the dystopian stuff. There's a lot of positive things about social media too. So I think what I think about it is you have to think about both. You
Right.
can't think about just, oh no, this is all bad or this is all good. You know, no, you know, it's both.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Sylvia, for taking the time. I